Former President Donald Trump's son, Eric Trump, took a stumble up on the stand during the civil fraud trial brought against the family after claiming he never worked on the Trump Organization's statement of financial condition and was not aware of it until the bank fraud trial came to fruition. Eric contradicted himself and admitted he was aware of them dating as far back as 2013, the New Republic writes.
Eric's big brother, Don Jr., also took the stand in New York this week and testified, saying that he has done anything and everything for the Trump Organization, but claimed to know nothing about generally accepted accounting principles. He says he leaves that to his CPAs. Trump Jr. and his younger brother, Eric Trump, are both named as defendants in the case. Don Jr. introduced himself as a, quote, real estate broker and said he had forgotten much of what he once knew about New York's rent stabilization laws. He also said he could not recall whether his father was still a trustee in the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust, which was used to hold Donald Trump's assets after he became president in 2017. Don Jr. even claimed not to know how to pronounce the word revocable.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. I'm not buying it. It is very funny, but I'm not buying it. I think they were very aware of the financial condition. I understand that they have a lot of people helping them with the family's finances, right? Accountants and things of the like. But I am very confident that they were aware of the family's financial condition. I understand Trump is saying, leave my children alone. He should have thought about that before bringing his children into business with him. If they didn't want to be involved, they could have, gardened back at the estate or something, rather than being so involved in his presidency and the family's businesses.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say you leave my kids alone when they quite literally are in leadership positions in the Trump Organization. So I don't get that argument at all. Mm-hmm. What I will say about this fraud case that I find really interesting is it seems like in general, it's kind of a circus on both sides. Yeah. So you have these guys testifying that they basically don't know anything that they were working on while with the Trump Organization, which I'm sure is some kind of legal strategy. And then on the judge's side, you have him accusing one of the Trump lawyers of being a misogynist because he insulted a law clerk or something. And then you have him even prior to the trial agreeing that Mar-a-Lago was only worth $18 million, which any rational person would say is totally insane, considering it's literal oceanfront property in one of the most desirable parts of Florida. So this whole case to me is such a distraction. It's silly. I don't even know why the charges were brought in the first place. I mean, when we're talking about real estate, I think everybody knows that it is incredibly common for people at this high of a level to always exaggerate a little bit what their property values are. And I think what happened is that the appraiser in the case, which the judge agreed with, deliberately lowballed all of the true valuations to make what Trump did seem way worse than normal.
For a while, I'm thinking of other cases where you had very powerful people involved in this kind of corruption and valuation of property. You had United Fruit Company operating in Guatemala. A lot of, U.S.-based investors, CEOs, leaders of that organization, their former corporate lawyers ended up heading the State Department, the Secretary of State, and then the head of the CIA. But they had a very friendly president to United Fruit Company for quite some time there in Guatemala, and they reduced the value of all of their property so that they could skirt taxes.
Right.
And then when a leftist government got in charge, they were like, hey, you can't do this anymore. And actually, if any of this arable land where we can farm fruit on is not used, the state has the right to buy it back at the value of its last valuation. And they bought it all back very cheap. United Fruit Company was very upset. So basically for fraud, when I think about this kind of fraud, I think, they were probably, when I first heard of this case, I'm like, they're devaluing the property so that they can skirt taxes. But it's hilarious to me that the conversations behind the scenes from Cohen's testimony is that Trump wanted to be higher on the Forbes list. And so he would say, it needs to be higher. I think it's worth, $6 billion, maybe $8 billion now with everything going on, so that he could just be higher on the Forbes list, which is just such a silly reason to commit fraud. And that reasoning from Cohen made me realize that what's at stake? What's the outcome of this? What is justice for the American people as an outcome of this trial? And I don't know, Forbes changes what their list was.
Right.
I just haven't been able to find any other real consequences that harm other people from this fraud case.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other element of it was that they claimed he was valuating the properties higher so he could get bigger loans because he was able to use the property as leverage. The other element of it, besides the Mar-a-Lago property, is his penthouse in New York City. And there was a debate over the square footage of the apartment. And so this seemed like a very cut and dry example of fraud because Trump's legal team had basically tacked on like an extra, 5,000 square feet to what the penthouse footprint actually was. And their argument was that when you're going through this process in court, there's not really, or not in court, but when you're evaluating a property that's a condominium, there's not really a cut and dry way to add in the value of shared amenities. So like a pool or a common area or a game room or what have you. And so they tried to add on the appropriate square footage that would increase the value to what they thought those common areas were worth. Because if you think about it, if you own a condo and you live in a just standard building and you have your condo and that's it. And then if you buy a condo in a building that's like a luxury apartment that has an indoor heated pool and an outdoor pool and a sauna and all of these other common amenities, the condo that's in the luxury building is obviously going to be worth more money. And so I think what they were trying to do was trying to find a way for that to be valued properly given the common areas and the amenities. And the only way to do that in the valuation process was to tack on square footage that didn't exist.
Yeah, I think that this should be illegal. Just leveraging your loans against your assets. I mean, this is what makes banks very vulnerable. I think about Elon Musk leveraging his loan to purchase Twitter against Tesla stock. I think the valuation of Tesla that was done by the bank, I just want to know what was going through their minds. If Tesla goes under, which is possible based on the company's finances, what would you do in that scenario? Would you sell it for parts? As a bank, what's the strategy there? They have made it very easy for a lot of wealthy people to gain access to capital, to make more money, leveraging a lot of their loans against their assets. I think it's a fascinating problem that I think need more financial protections around. When I think about the Trump family and how they're doing business all as a family and being deposed, of course they should be deposed, but also I want the loan officer that did the valuation as well to be deposed. If that's really what we care about, let's get into the weeds of it. Let's uncover some things. And if I'm Elizabeth Warren and I'm responsible for making some financial regulations, I would have my eyes all over this, thinking of, okay, if this is such a problem, what legislation can we draft? I agree that oftentimes we have these kinds of trials. Hunter Biden is one of them, where it feels very political. It feels like they want to take down Hunter Biden because you have these investigations, you have these trials without the legislation to prevent people in power from doing it again. It just feels very dishonest when you have one but not the other, and people cheerleading for these trials in Congress when they're in the position from preventing something like this from happening again.
Yeah, that's a good point. So often the Justice Department or even just the legal system in general is leveraged against political opponents. And whether or not you support that happening is dependent on whether or not you support the individual or their political party. And that's why these various indictments against Trump are so troubling to me. But this one in particular is I think, one of the worst, besides January 6th. But this one is so troubling, I think, because, we've alluded to it throughout this entire conversation, which is that property valuations and company valuations are incredibly subjective. They change on an almost daily basis based on the conditions of the economy, based on the potential demand for some of these things. Even if you just look at stock prices like Tesla, 2 years ago, it was at $300 a share. Now it's at like $210, and has dropped even down to $150, I think, in recent months. So the idea that there's some magical number that is the right number of what Mar-a-Lago was worth, for example, is kind of silly. And to be having this big show trial where the judge is throwing out accusations of misogyny and instituting gag orders and fining Trump because he's talking about the ridiculousness of the case, it's all, I think, such a colossal waste of time.
Yeah, I think the deposition videos are very funny, and for that, to me, it's all worth it. We're gonna have to leave this one here. We've got more Rising right after this.